We are all set.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody, and welcome. Before I start, I think in the interest of full disclosure, I should tell you what one of my board members just noted for the record, that I am from Chicago, and we set this hearing on Valentine's Day. So he wanted to make sure nobody was drawing any inferences from that. I think that's why you raised it. Don't expect any massacres yet. Robert, I'm glad your mind goes in those directions. Keeps me grounded. We're here today on the Amtrak-Gulf Coast case, a petition. You all know the number. I don't need to identify it for the record, to discuss the status of the settlement agreement that we were informed on. But why exactly are we having this hearing? The Gulf Coast line has been without passenger service for 19 years since Hurricane Katrina. Amtrak initiated this case in 2021, 16 years later. The board devoted substantial attention to hearing the case during 2022 and completed a lengthy 11-day hearing on the record, the first under that statute in the history of the statute. The parties announced to us and notified the board that on November 21, 2022, you had all reached a settlement and asked us to hold the case in abeyance while you worked out the details. The board agreed. The board encourages settlements, still encourages settlements, and is happy you've all settled. And we've held the proceeding in abeyance, receiving very cursory status reports up until now from the parties. That was 15 months ago. Many people are wondering when the trains are going to begin running, which is why we asked a few weeks ago for more detailed accounting of the status of the settlement. We're here today because we still haven't received all those details. Frankly, I get more information from the Alabama Media Group about what's happening with this proposed line than I got even in the somewhat more detailed, most recent status report. So today we will be exploring what is holding up the final disposition of this case, and equally importantly, useful information for the public as to when these trains will begin running. I was to say if ever, but I am confident the trains will be running, and I believe everybody in this room is as well. It's just a question of when. Before we begin, I want to just cover a few procedural and technical matters. To use the microphones, hopefully you will all remember this, at least those of you at the table, you have to press the button once. There may be a very slight delay, so remember that before you start speaking. Only one of these microphones can be on at a time. So when you finish speaking, remember to hit the button. If you don't, I'll try to remind you because we're all guilty of it up here as well. You may be asked to repeat yourself if you say something when somebody else's microphone was on, so the court reporter gets everything down. And the court reporter, I am sure, will feel free to interject if he can't hear what's going on, or she. I'm sorry, I can't see over the ledge there. There you are. If we do need to go into a confidential or highly confidential session, which I do not anticipate, I will ask any members of the public who are not authorized to be in such a session to step out of the hearing room temporarily. You will need to go out and wait in our lobby, and you can monitor. There'll be a YouTube stream which will have a placeholder on it, so you'll know when to come back in. And also we may, if there's staff here, we'll send somebody out to get you. Those who are, this is being streamed on our YouTube site. And for those of you who are watching on YouTube, you will get this placeholder if we go into a confidential session. as I mentioned, we are on YouTube and the link is available on the board's website. The transcript of the hearing will be placed on the board's website after the close, and the recording the recording of the hearing will also be available. With that, I know I have a number of questions and I know other board members do as well, but if any of you, and I think I'll just go from my left to right, want to make an initial statement before we get started, I'd like to give you that opportunity. Otherwise, we will have some questions, I'm sure, for all of you. So with that, Matt, anybody want to speak up?
Mr. Chairman, I think Amtrak should speak first, and then we could speak.
Okay,
After that.
that would be fine. Is that okay with you? Just okay. Go ahead.
Could you introduce yourself?
The settlement remain confidential. Thanks. Sorry. Although specific terms and conditions of the settlement remain confidential, one of the major components was the submission of an application for a CRISI grant to fund a number of agreed upon infrastructure projects associated with restoration of the Gulf Coast service. The parties cooperated extensively on the submission of the CRISI grant, which was submitted on December 1st, 2022. On September 21st, 2023, the FRA announced that the $178 million grant had been awarded to Amtrak. Since that announcement, Amtrak has been working closely with the FRA towards execution of the grant agreement and obligation of the funds. This process is proceeding well, and the FRA and Amtrak are actively involved in discussions about the terms and conditions of that grant, which Amtrak received in December 2023. The parties have agreed that dismissal of the proceedings before the board is not appropriate unless and until funding for the agreed upon infrastructure projects is set forth in an executed funding agreement. To be clear, execution of the funding agreement is the only step that remains outstanding for dismissal of these proceedings before the board. As to the start of service, the parties have agreed that twice daily Gulf Coast service can begin as soon as the Mobile Station track project is complete. This project involves installing approximately 3,000 feet of layover track, and Amtrak is funding this separately from the CRISI grant. Amtrak and CSX have already executed a design and construction agreement and have been working diligently on all design and pre-construction activities over the last few months. The Mobile Station track project also depends upon Amtrak successfully negotiating a land use agreement with the city of Mobile. As the mayor reported in his letter to the board this week, Amtrak and the city are actively engaged in forward-moving negotiations on a weekly basis. Amtrak personnel met with the mayor and his staff in Mobile in December, and Amtrak has reached out to Mobile to set up additional meetings to address Mobile's questions and requests for information. The port has agreed to facilitate discussions and provide support for all efforts Amtrak undertakes with local authorities in Mobile to promptly reach an agreement to secure the property necessary for the Mobile Station track project. This matter is a high priority for all parties and for the FRA. The FRA administrator is convening regular meetings of the principals from each of the parties to assess and facilitate project advancement. The first such meeting was held in December 2023 and was attended by the parties' CEOs or their representatives. The parties greatly appreciate the FRA's ongoing leadership and stewardship. Amtrak is committed to working with all parties to take the needed steps to start the service in 2024. As we stated in our filing, we respectfully request that the board continue to hold this matter in abeyance pending notification that the matter can be dismissed following the execution of the Chrissy grant agreement. If we do not file such a notice on or before May 1st, we can submit a further joint status report to the board.
All right, before questions, does anybody else want to add anything? Anybody else?
So for CSX, if I could just add a few additional comments and then we'll answer questions. First, we'd like to echo the sentiments that are expressed by Amtrak in their opening remarks about the collaborative and cooperative nature of the work between the parties. It's almost 2 years to the day from when we kicked off this proceeding with a public hearing. And at that time, the parties weren't agreeing on much of anything. We've made a great deal of progress and are grateful for the assistance of the board itself, who did encourage the parties at the end of the 11-day hearing to put their heads together to find a cooperative solution that would allow the Gulf Coast service to be implemented safely while both passenger and freight are effectively using the corridor. As you know, the timetable, there was a Chrissy grant application. It took about 9 months or so for that application to be awarded, and things are now accelerating. A couple of key facts is, FRA has really taken the lead in helping to shepherdize this project. This is a large Chrissy grant award. And so the administrator brought all the parties together, not just the 4 of us here, but other interested stakeholders, which was attended by the top leadership of the companies, which is an indication of the priority that this project is being given. Since then, CSX and Amtrak have been working cooperatively to do what we can in advance of some of the key milestones. As was already mentioned, the most significant one is the execution of the technical funding agreement with FRA, which is what actually is sort of the formal agreement that permits the parties to proceed forward. That's being done through Amtrak in cooperation with FRA. I just wanted to share a couple of the details of what CSX has been doing to help facilitate, and I'll focus just on the Mobile station. Since the award has been granted, we have executed an agreement with Amtrak. We hosted a meeting for all the interested parties to come to the Mobile station and look at the property in question. We've been working on the design of the Mobile station track. We got to about a 30% design of the track, and then working with FRA, we had to pause that while the FRA performed its review in accordance with its procedures in NEPA. Just last week or the week before that, we were authorized to move forward to 60% design, which we're undertaking. And CSX is also pre-placing equipment and some construction materials on site in order to facilitate the construction of the track once the process continues to proceed forward through FRA and Amtrak. They're also taking other steps, whatever required permits, things of that sort. So I just want to reiterate how productively the parties have been working together. This is not just Amtrak and CSX, but Norfolk Southern and the port as well. We do appreciate the board's patience in understanding we haven't actually asked for the outright dismissal of the case, and that's awaiting the tactical funding agreements between the parties. We're happy, Matt and I are happy to address any questions we can offer you about the status of those activities, with the important caveat that the terms of the settlement agreement remain confidential and can't be disclosed with the board. So with that, we'd be pleased to answer your questions.
Thank you, Ray. I meant to say at the outset, so I'll interject it here now. I don't know how long we're going to be here. Don't anticipate that we'll be here that long, but depending on how long we're here, we will take a lunch break, but we may or may not need to. And I meant to say that at the outset. Anyone else have anything they want to add?
Well, CSX has, we have to put in our me too. So, no, I think Jesse and Ray have said it well. I just want for the record to indicate that first off, Norfolk Southern was very appreciative of the board trying to encourage settlement. And that was something that was very important. And we're also appreciative of all the other parties here that encouraged the settlement. And I think an important component too was the FRA grant. And we really Norfolk Southern is very appreciative of the FRA and the efforts that they have undertaken. And we think it's a very positive approach. We are moving forward. We've participated in all the meetings. We are prepared to implement our infrastructure as soon as we can get a funding agreement. We too have done preliminary design work. And Norfolk Southern is very supportive of all the efforts of the parties here and stand ready, willing, and able to go as fast as possible.
Thank you, Bill. Robert?
Thank you. Good morning, board members. Obviously, Rob Wimbish here on behalf of the Port and the Terminal Railway Alabama State Docks, the rail carrier division of the Port. I wanted to start by just quickly thanking the board for deciding to schedule the hearing today, notwithstanding it being Valentine's Day. As you may know, Mobile is the birthplace of Mardi Gras in the United States. That was yesterday. I know that the port officials are participating in this meeting online. I think it would have been difficult for them to have been paying much attention to this yesterday. So grateful for the scheduling in light of that. I don't know if it was fortuitous or not, but thank you all the same. The port, as with everyone else here at this table, is very heavily engaged in seeing this matter through. This proceeding started as a request to compel access over CSX and Norfolk Southern lines. After considerable testimony and evidence, you would have still been faced with that decision had we not been able to reach an accord. I think that would have been a very difficult decision. I think from all of the reports today, you'll see that we are very close to a settlement that will eliminate the need for this agency to reach the decision that was put before you. As I've mentioned, the port is engaged in those efforts. We have a fairly limited role in the sense that, well, we have two roles, but limited in the sense that the infrastructure that is the subject of others' discussions here today none of it is taking place on port property. So none of this will end up being port infrastructure, but it will be infrastructure that will protect port operations. So that's the first thing. The second thing is obviously we had committed to be the point of contact and the principal source of support to the city of Mobile with respect to the station track project. As you can imagine, the port and the city remain in regular contact on a variety of topics, not just rail operations. And this is among the things that we have strenuously encouraged, we the port, that Mobile engage in these discussions and reach a fruitful result from that. I will point out that roughly 2 years ago, and I think this is symbolic of the significance of the progress that was made, almost exactly 2 years ago to the day, Mayor Stimson, and I'm pointing this out from the transcript that I happen to have, was here before you, here in the virtual sense. And at that time, his focus was strictly on the Brooklyn Aeroplex station, not a downtown station. In fact, his testimony to you at the time said that a downtown station would be, in his words, a mistake. And we have moved significantly off of that since that position. And I think part of that is because the port has been instrumental in facilitating steps toward a settlement that achieves what Amtrak is looking to accomplish. I think that's all I have to offer for now. I'd be happy to answer any other questions. I think that the report that was provided pretty well synthesizes the port's role and what it's been doing, but I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Thank you, Rob.
Yeah, thank you.
So let me start off here. I'm sure other members have some things to add. First of all, I accept what all of you have said about appreciative of the board encouraging settlement. We always encourage settlement, and we still do, and we don't have any interest in not having you carry out this settlement, bring it to fruition as soon as possible. I do have a memory that the real encouragement of the settlement was when we announced we were going to have a voting conference. It seemed to be somewhat of a stimulus. And I hope we don't have to get there again. It's not my intent anyway to do that, but rather to do what all of you have said, and that is you're rapidly working towards bringing this to a conclusion. Rob, I wanted to focus in particular well, on a number of things, but I have received a letter from one of your United States senators, Senator Brett, which is we've published on our, public availability correspondence last week, emphasizing the importance of the port to the economy of this, not only Mobile, but all of Alabama, in her view. And otherwise being generally supportive of what the board has done to try to move this project forward. I think it's fair to say. Just to be clear, I think you've said it, but the concerns that the port had all during the hearing, the issues that you raised, I take it from what you have said, the port with the proposed projects in the settlement is satisfied that the port will not suffer all of the harms that you had raised and that the senator had asked us to be sure we're concerned about. Is that a fair statement?
I think, Chairman, that's a fair statement. I mean, obviously, what we've achieved here was a settlement. A settlement is a form of compromise, but I think that compromise has to take into account all the stakeholders. I think it did. And I think as far as, kind of the path ahead with this, the notion here, I think, has got to be coexistence. I think that was sort of the concept from the very beginning, is that all of these parties ultimately have to coexist. And that's especially the case as long as the federal statutory regime for passenger service remains as it is. That concept of coexistence has to prevail. I think it has. I think in some ways this solution that we've achieved was something that I would have, in retrospect, liked to have seen to have had been accomplished in the absence of an STB proceeding. But I do think, going back to your very specific question about this, that the infrastructure that's in place should protect the port's operational interests in the Mobile terminal.
When you say in place, you mean that is proposed?
To propose to be put in place. Would that it were.
Yes, I think we all feel that way. I do have a number of questions as they relate to Amtrak and the city of Mobile. So let me just jump right into that. And I guess as to somewhat to CSX as well. In the original application and in the evidence at the hearing, Amtrak said that it would be able to start running trains by using a layover area in the Choctaw Yard while the station track was being built. You haven't given us all the details of the settlement, but I am wondering why it appears, I infer, that you will not start running the trains until a 3,000-foot layover track is built, which was, I think, a layover track downtown was always in the works, or was part of the permanent plan. But why not use the intermediate plan that was originally talked about so trains can get running sooner?
Mr. Chair, as we reported, the parties have agreed that the Gulf Coast service can resume as soon as the Mobile Station track project is complete. That was the parties' agreement.
So you're saying that that precondition is one of the terms of the settlement?
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
I'm not sure at this point, since a great deal of information is laid out in the Chrissy application and will be part of any agreement. What's so secret about the settlement agreement? I'm not pressing you to reveal anything else that's in it, but I can't figure for the life of me what any of these parties have as an interest in keeping any of the other terms secret. Who's paying what is all in the Chrissy grant. That's usually a matter of some concern. People don't want to know what they're paying. I respect that, but we know that. So why is the rest of this confidential? Does anybody want to address that without telling us what's in it? Well, what is the concern?
Without telling you what's in it, I could say, Mr. Chairman, there are a number of provisions of the settlement agreement that go beyond what is in the public Chrissy grant, which is now public on the FRA's FOIA website and available. We've worked closely together and gone as far as we can, but we would, ask the board not to inquire into further into the terms of the settlement agreement and, just, adhere to your usual practice and the practice in, most federal courts that, settlement agreements are going to be respected and confidential.
No, I appreciate that, and I'm not pressing it. I just would note that there are at least 4 parties to this agreement, 2 of which are public bodies and spend public money. And there's a 5th party, the city of Mobile, which is not a party, and the Southern Rail Commission, I guess, which is not a party, but all spend public monies. And I think the public has some right to transparency, and this transaction involves millions and millions of dollars of public funds. So I would encourage at some point in this process that the parties make as much as they possibly can transparent. I'm not going to ask the board to order it or delve into it, but I think it's there is an overuse of confidentiality generally, in my view, when we're involving public bodies. This is not just a private business transaction. Let me get back to Amtrak and the city of Mobile. And I have to say, Jesse, that I noted in the status report that Amtrak said that it is giving this matter its highest priority, that the matter is receiving the, quote, highest levels of attention from each party. As Ray pointed out, this started 2 years ago in its formal process. I'm wondering how slow this would be if you weren't giving it your highest priority. I mean, first of all, the design of the station track. This is not a mystery. This has been on the proposal for years. Why are we still waiting for design to be completed on a station track? And when is the construction going to start on that track? And when will it be finished? I mean, you're talking about running trains in 2024. You're going to finish that track this year?
Mr. Chair, as we both reported, Amtrak and CSX have signed a design and construction agreement for the construction of the Mobile Station track. CSX is responsible for that construction, and I'm happy to have Mr. Atkins report further on the proceedings with respect to the construction.
But when did you start working on the design? You settled the case 50.
So Chairman, so we started right away working together almost as soon as we inked it in anticipation of the Christie grant being awarded. We were optimistic. But you need to understand, like, the design of it has to go through FRA. So it's part of their NEPA process. It is being funded by FRA. So there's steps that have to be taken. And so the 30% design is one threshold. Once you get to 30% design, you submit it to FRA. FRA is reviewing it. We couldn't proceed past 30% design until 2 weeks ago. So I appreciate that everyone wants to move it forward as quickly as possible. And I really feel like we've been moving it expeditiously from pretty much the moment that we all signed the settlement agreement. I mean, the first effort was getting the Christie grant in. That was a huge undertaking on our part to do that in the span of like 3 weeks. And then once that happened, we put in place agreements to govern the actual, design and construction of it. But so in terms of like the speed of it, there are certain requirements that we were told to adhere to from FRA. And I don't want to point blame at FRA. They've been working super fast as well. I really feel like everyone has been working quickly and expeditiously. At the moment, we're proceeding to the 60% design of it, which I don't anticipate is going to take a great deal of time. And then we'll be sharing that with FRA. And then once the funding agreement is executed, then the construction of the project will begin.
How long will it take to build the track?
So I'm hesitant to give you,
Ballpark.
yeah, I'd say a year less. The key question is NEPA. So there is work that's being done by.
I understand. We live with NEPA too, so you can't.
But it also affects the timetable. So you appreciate, like, we need to understand the parameters of what is required of the parties. But I think the thought is, if we get a green light, that it would be with a year, 12 months.
So the trains are not going to run in 2024.
Well, we're pre-putting in place, equipment and the like. You're asking me for now, I'm going to give a conservative estimate because if I tell you something quicker and we don't meet it, then people are going to be pointing fingers. But I can tell you, CSX it's a top priority to get it done as soon as the funding agreement is executed.
Well, I'm appreciative of that, and a conservative agreement, I think, estimate is wise. I'd like a conservative estimate, but it seems
Yeah.
that
So let me just-
we're looking at 2025.
Let me just clarify. So we have schedules that the parties share with each other all the time. And Jesse just shared with me, and I'm sure this is right, that currently, if everything goes according to plan, it's October is our scheduled completion of the station track. So
That assumes construction when? You can't do that until you have,
it has timetables for all the expected milestones, which includes the FRA approvals and the like.
is what you're really saying.
Well, that's, yes, and I know I've seen that document, and I know they've been sharing on an almost weekly basis or bi-weekly basis, updated schedules between the two parties trying to promote the construction of the project.
Thank you. Just a point of clarification. The costs of the Mobile track and the station are not being paid through the Grissy grant. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's a separate.
So you made some reference to the grant, but that doesn't impact the design, construction, and moving forward with the station.
That's right. Jesse can answer that question. There's a separate funding source for the Mobile station, which also requires us to go through this to work with FRA. But it's not the Chrissy grant. That's correct.
It's not the Chrissy grant.
Yes.
Is it another grant that's subject to the agreement?
Member Headland, if I may, Amtrak is funding that separately through Amtrak's own national network grants. And however, the actual construction of the track is tied to the execution of the funding agreement. Even though it's being funded separately, the actual construction as agreed among the parties cannot start until the Chrissy funding agreement is fully executed.
Okay, so you can do all of the engineering, you just can't start the civil works until the funding agreement, which is not funding the station, but that's part of your agreement.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. I was confused about that.
Thank you, Karen. That's helpful to have clarified that. Does that construction of the station through the other funds also require a NEPA review?
Yes, there is NEPA review undergoing for both the platform and the layover track.
So according to media reports, I guess it was alluded to in the status report, you're still negotiating with the city of Mobile over the terms of the station. Is that right?
As we reported to the board, we need to reach agreement with Mobile on some of the property that is necessary for the layover track. That's correct.
For the track or for the station?
We are negotiating with Mobile on the track and the platform.
So if you don't have a deal yet with Mobile, how are you doing a NEPA review? You don't even know where the station's going to be.
There is a review underway for a temporary platform in Mobile.
Do you have agreement with Mobile for a temporary platform?
As the mayor reported, we are engaged in forward-moving negotiations on a regular basis.
Let me ask you this question. There are two issues involving the city of Mobile. One of which the status report is completely silent on. And I have to say, since it's been widely reported in the media, I'm speaking for myself now, other board members can speak for themselves. I found the status report in this regard to be significantly misleading in the fact that it fails to mention in any way an ongoing unresolved matter, according to media reports, with the city of Mobile over the operating subsidy. Concept isn't even mentioned. And yet, in the status report, and I don't know who wrote it, I said it's a joint project, it says, we have no further information to offer. As I said at the outset, we have a case that's pending. We understand the limits of that case. Your negotiations with the city of Mobile were not in that case, but the case is about whether the trains are going to run. That's why we're here. That's why the board devoted the effort to it. And I think the public, if we're going to have a report on where this stands, should have a full report on what's holding things up. According to Alabama media, you all have it, I'm sure. In September of last year, when the Chrissy grant was approved, September 26th, there was a report about the need stated by the city of Mobile to resolve the focus on the lease agreement for the station or the temporary platform, or apparently both, it doesn't specify, and the operating agreement. That was in September. Now we're in the middle of February. Amtrak has known for years that it needed to work out an operating agreement. The same report noted that in 2020, the Mobile City Council had approved a $3 million operating support agreement for Amtrak before you even brought this case. So let's explore these one at a time. When did you start negotiating the lease with the city of Mobile?
Mr. Chair, we started negotiating the lease very quickly after the parties' settlement was reached, but I don't think it's appropriate to go into all of the back and forth with the city of Mobile.
I'm not asking you about the back and forth. I'm asking you when you started. You started in November of 2022?
Probably not exactly November, because of course all the parties were then working on submitting the Chrissy grant application, but shortly thereafter.
So you start negotiations, let's say the first of the year of 2023. At the end of September, the city of Mobile saying we still need to figure out a lease. Now it's the middle of February. So it's at least 13 months or 14 months after you started negotiating a lease. I've negotiated leases. I've been in a city council which has negotiated leases. I've been at a commuter railroad which has negotiated leases. Karen has probably negotiated as many leases as anybody in this room. It doesn't take 14 months to negotiate a lease if you really want to reach an agreement. What is going on?
Mr. Chair, as I said, I don't think it's appropriate for me to go into the back and forth between Amtrak and Mobile in this public forum, but as the mayor reported, we are engaged in ongoing forward-moving negotiations with respect to the lease and other issues.
Well, it's very frustrating for me sitting up here to get a report that says we're ongoing. We've been ongoing for 14 months. And we may or may not have an answer by May 1st, which is another 2 months from now, actually 2.5 months, and we'll give you another report then. You can't start running the trains, I assume, until you have an agreement with Mobile where the people are going to step off the train onto a platform. So how are we supposed to take, why should the public feel any assurance that you're ever going to reach an agreement with Mobile? I mean, it's extraordinarily frustrating. We're talking about a piece of concrete for people to step on. It's not that hard if you really want to reach an agreement. And quite frankly, I'm quite skeptical of it. And I think you owe the public a little more of an explanation.
Mr. Chair, I can just assure you that Amtrak is committed to working with all parties, including the city of Mobile, to ensure that service can start in 2024. Amtrak is giving this a very high priority, and Amtrak is committed, as the mayor of Mobile reported to you, to continuing to engage in forward-moving negotiations with the city.
Well, I would say again, a high priority has resulted in 14 months. I'm glad it's not a low priority. What about the operating agreement? Do you have a operating agreement with the city of Mobile? Subsidy agreement?
Mr. Chair, with respect to operating costs and an operating agreement, those negotiations are also ongoing. You noted that we did not report on operating costs and operating agreements in the status report. That is because the status report asked the parties to report on implementation of the settlement terms. The issues regarding operating costs and operating support do not implicate the parties before the board or the proceeding before the board. In fact, you may recall that when we had the virtual public hearing almost 2 years ago to the day, Member Headland made exactly that observation in response to the testimony from one of the participants. So that said, Amtrak is continuing to work with the Southern Rail Commission and with its state and local partners to address issues of operating costs and operating support.
Well, the Southern Rail Commission sent us a letter on this point and said Mr. Knox says it is noted that the matter of operating costs remains unaddressed within the submission, referring to the February 1st status report. As such, the SRC is respectfully requesting further inquiry into outstanding support needs that would be required to ensure successful restoration of Gulf Coast services. So you say you're working with the SRC. They've asked us to bring it up at this hearing. One of the reasons I brought it up, as did Senator Britt, who specifically mentions in her letter of February 9th, while the Christie grant funding will be, I'm reading, will be impactful to realizing the return of service, I appreciate the consideration of ongoing, by us, that's who she's writing to, ongoing costs associated with starting the service that are outside the scope of the grant. So I think whether you reach operating cost agreements are certainly something that we need to explore. Let me ask this question, Jesse. If you never reach an operating cost agreement with the city of Mobile, are you going to run the trains, assuming you get the station lease resolved?
Amtrak is committed to running the trains in 2024. We brought this proceeding, Mr. Chair, because there was no agreement among the parties. We now have an agreement among the parties. We are working with these parties on implementing that agreement, and we are working with parties that are not before the board and are not involved at all in the actual legal issues that are before the board on working together to ensure that the trains can run and that we have operating support and are addressing all of the operating costs.
Will you not run the trains until you resolve the operating cost agreement with the city of Mobile?
I believe that under PREA 209 for a state-sponsored service, we need to have operating agreements in place in order to run the trains.
Don't you have them with the other states, Mississippi and Louisiana?
There are operating agreements with, I believe, Louisiana in place, and Mississippi is still being negotiated.
And is it not the case that you could run the trains with those two states, even if you don't have an agreement with Alabama or Mobile?
Mr. Chair, as I said, we are still working through all of these issues, and I do not have an answer for the board on that today.
Did you not have an agreement with the city of Mobile back in 2020 when the city council approved $3 million? Was that just out of the one-sided offer on their part? Or was it pursuant to an agreement with Amtrak?
The city in 2020 approved $3 million as a match grant to a restoration and enhancement grant that the Southern Rail Commission received. And yes, they did approve that in 2020 for operating costs for the Gulf Coast service.
Right. And was that by agreement with Amtrak?
That was through, it was match grants with the Southern Rail Commission.
Did Amtrak agree to a $3 million operating subsidy with the city of Mobile at that time?
There was no actual operating agreement in place at the time
Was the amount,
because the service had obviously not yet.
was the
been restored.
amount acceptable that the city of Mobile appropriated at that time?
At that time, the city of Mobile and the states of Louisiana and Mississippi each put up a 1/3 share against the restoration and enhancement grant that was received by the Southern Rail Commission, and that it fully matched the Southern Rail Commission.
I'm trying to find out, Jesse, if Amtrak was on board with that amount at that time and why it isn't still acceptable. What's holding up the operating agreement? If you had an agreement, now why not? Why don't you have one now? Now, if you didn't have an agreement in 2020, tell me.
Mr. Chair, the amount was the amount that was needed for a 1/3 match in 2020. The parties are continuing to work through issues relating to operating costs and ongoing operating support for the service.
Are you telling me that the amount is no longer acceptable? That what was acceptable 4 years ago is no longer acceptable?
The parties are continuing to work through issues related to operating costs, which also implicate, of course, cost methodologies that are set by the State Amtrak Intercity Passenger Rail Committee.
I'm having trouble getting an answer to the question. Was there something that was acceptable 4 years ago? You're saying you're still working it through. My inference is therefore you haven't got something that's now acceptable, even though you had something that was acceptable before. Is that a fair statement?
The parties are working through the issues of rising operating costs and how to address them.
You know, every time I ask you, Jesse, you say you're working it through. Working it through sounds to me like you don't have an agreement today. Is that a fair statement?
There is no operating agreement in place with the city of Mobile. That's correct.
Even though you didn't have an operating agreement apparently in place in 2020, it's what you say. My inference was you had you tell me if it's wrong. That's why I'm asking the question, that you were at least in agreement on the amount that would be provided by the city of Mobile at the level of $3 million. And that $3 million is no longer acceptable to Amtrak. Could you answer that question?
Mr. Chair, I want to be clear. Amtrak is not saying that the $3 million is not acceptable to Amtrak. The $3 million is part of ongoing negotiations with the city of Mobile that are involve multiple issues. And so I also want to be clear, we did not have an operating agreement in place with the city of Mobile in 2020. As I said, the $3 million that the city council passed in 2020 was the 1/3 match grant, 1/3 match to the restoration and enhancement grant received by the Southern Rail Commission.
Well, the reason I keep pressing on this, Jesse, is that the press reports have people in the city of Mobile saying they don't know how much they're going to have to spend. And they don't want to have an open-ended or a pig in a poke agreement with Amtrak. So do they know how much they have to spend or do they not? Can you answer that question?
Amtrak met with the city of Mobile down in Mobile in December and has reached out to the city of Mobile for to address Mobile's concerns with respect to operating agreements and operating costs. And as the mayor reported, we are continuing to meet and we hope to be able to address those concerns.
When you began negotiating the lease and around the end of 2022 or early 2023, I gather, as best I can gather from your statements, did you also begin negotiating the operating agreement?
I don't know the answer to that, Mr. Chair.
Because I'm wondering how long it takes to negotiate an operating agreement, something that's been in discussion for years and years, and you still don't have one. Because as I sit up here, I'm waiting for, and I hope that Karen may want to ask some questions that will enlighten us on this. What's involved with the Chrissy agreement? That's not done. I'm waiting for the NEPA review to be done, which doesn't sound like it should be very challenging. You're building a track along a right of way that's had tracks for years. There's a lease agreement, which has been known to be needed for years. and an operating agreement. None of those are done. So it's very hard for me to sit up here and say, yeah, those trains will be running in October. And particularly when I get a report that says we may be back on May 1st with another status report. So it really leaves a lot to be desired, I have to say, Jesse, in terms of bringing this case to a conclusion. I've negotiated a lot of settlements in my time, many more complicated than this. And if people really want to make a deal, it doesn't take 15 months to make a deal. Karen,
Mr. Chair, if I can
yeah.
just address that for a moment, I certainly appreciate the sentiment and just want to reiterate Amtrak's strong commitment to working with both the parties that are before the board as well as parties that are not before the board and are not involved in the legal issues before the board and are instead involved in issues related to lease agreements and operating costs, et cetera. Amtrak brought this whole proceeding because Amtrak wants to restore Gulf Coast service. That was why Amtrak brought this proceeding to the board. Amtrak is fully committed to doing that and is working as expeditiously as possible to make that happen.
And the board devoted an enormous amount of effort, which is our statutory obligation, so I'm not complaining about it, to hearing the case so that you could restore service. And here we are 15 months later, and I'd say we're on a wing and a prayer, except it's a railroad as to when this is trains are going to start running. Karen?
Let me continue with a few questions about the operating agreement. And thank you for refreshing my recollection that I'd actually asked about it. But just so everybody understands, the 2 round trips from New Orleans to Mobile are what is referred to as state-supported routes. They're under 750 miles. And as state-supported routes by federal law, they're required to be the operating costs or some allocable portion of the operating costs are required to be paid for by the state sponsors, state or local sponsors. Okay. So when you filed your application in March of 2021, you represented that service could commence by January 1, 2022. At the time you filed the application, it sounds like you did not have an agreement as to the payment of operating costs. Is that correct? And when you filed the application, you did not have an agreement as to operating costs.
At the time we filed the application, there were operating costs already obligated, both through the Southern Rail Commission and then through the funds that the 1/3 matches from Mobile, Mississippi and Louisiana. However, you're correct that there were not actual PREA 209 operating agreements in place.
Well, under current law, 49 USC 24712G, it requires that before beginning construction or operation, you have to have an MOU or an agreement with the states for sharing ongoing operating and capital costs. It says, notwithstanding any other provision of law, before beginning construction necessary for or beginning operation of a state-supported route that is initiated on or after the date of enactment of the Passenger Rail Expansion and Rail Safety Act of 2021, which I think is part of the IHAA and was enacted in November of 2020. Is that correct? November of 2021. Amtrak shall enter into a memorandum of understanding or otherwise secure an agreement with each state that would be providing funding for such route for sharing ongoing operating and capital costs and so forth. I think what is of concern here is that Amtrak initiated a proceeding with us that took 11 days of board time to go through the hearing. We were solely focused on the issue of capital costs. We should have been focused on the operating costs. Whether or not subsection G applies to this transaction, I don't know what the word initiated means. If you bring another case like this, don't bring it until you have an operating agreement in place. That's a real concern here. It's very disappointing to get to this point where you have an agreement on capital costs. The capital costs have been funded. It's been 6 months since FRA announced the Chrissy grant. When I was at FRA, you could get a Chrissy, you could get the equivalent. We negotiated a lot of agreements under the Recovery Act in less than 6 months with the states for improvements of Amtrak service. They know how to get this done. Terms and conditions are not new. They're the biggest grantee of the federal government. It just shouldn't take that long to get an agreement in place. There are standard terms and conditions that they've negotiated numerous times. This isn't like bringing in somebody that's never seen a Chrissy grant before. So I'm hopeful it's not going to take another 6 months to get those in place. They know what they're doing. They just sit down and they should be able to hammer it out. But again, I'm very disappointed that we are here today not talking about really concerns other than getting a final agreement executed about the capital costs. We are delighted that that issue has been put to bed, but we are now, you apparently are dealing with an issue that should have been resolved before you filed your papers here. I have another general comment. And it goes to the point I think the chairman was making about, why is this taking so long? Amtrak's president, Stephen Gardner, recently said in Baltimore, when I guess they broke ground on work for the big project in Baltimore, he said, Amtrak has rebounded from the pandemic and is growing again as part of our plan to double ridership by 2040. With funding from the infrastructure bill in hand, we and our partners are transforming intercity passenger rail across the country in a big way. Amtrak has also put out its Connect Us or Connect US vision, a 75-page report for new services by 2040. Its $25 billion expansion plan proposes service improvements to 25 existing routes and the addition of 39 entirely new routes. If the vision were to be fully realized, it would bring passenger rail to almost every major city in the US in 15 years. Right now, according to this report, only 27 of the top 50 metros are directly served. Amtrak estimates this would add 20 million trips annually, about double the number currently served on state-supported routes or those less than 500 miles. I am a big champion of Amtrak's vision. I have been for years. It's one of the reasons I wanted to be on this board, was to see what I could do to help further that vision. But doing all this is going to require a lot of effort in partnerships with the Class 1s. But those who are looking to Amtrak to bring new service as outlined in its plans may find that the progress you have made over the last couple of years in this proceeding to be a little bit disheartening. I'm a Chicagoan, a native, and Mr. Chairman, you know that Chicagoans believe in what Daniel Burnham, who designed Washington Union Station here, said years ago. Make no little plans, for they have no magic to stir men's blood, and probably themselves will not be realized. Make big plans. Aim high in hope and work, remembering that a noble, logical diagram once recorded will never die, but long after we are gone to be a living thing, asserting itself with ever-growing insistency. Not many people know the full quote, but that's it. That's what Daniel Burnham said. Make no little plans. Amtrak is making no little plans, but it has to figure out how to implement them. That's all I have.
Thanks, Marty. I just want to probe a little bit on the status of environmental review. Jesse, they're all categorical exclusions. for the projects, or are there more intensive environmental review procedures necessary?
It's my understanding with respect to the Mobile NEPA review that's
Uh-huh.
ongoing, it's categorical exclusions.
Okay, and is there anything else that does not, any other form of environmental review that could hold up service that doesn't involve a CADX?
I'm not aware of any, but I am not, I will confess, immersed in the details of NEPA review.
Okay, when did Amtrak, was Amtrak responsible for submitting the categorical exclusion to FRA for review?
Yes,
When did Amtrak first do that?
I do not have that information.
Did Amtrak submit, I would appreciate in a future status report if you could provide that information. Is any of that public in terms of the environmental review process?
I'm not aware of that either.
Okay.
I confess I'm not a NEPA lawyer, so.
Okay, so for CSX, one of the things that stands out to me is after Hurricane Katrina and the devastation that was wrought, I think it was 40 miles of CSX track, 6 bridges or something of that nature. You all reconstructed the infrastructure in 4 months. And I've seen freight railroads do incredible things after catastrophes. Dry Canyon Bridge with UP comes to mind as well. If there weren't constraints on review, and I'm not suggesting that there ought not to be, how much time would CSX take to construct, say, the station track?
I'm not an expert on construction either. I don't know how long it would take them if the track were wiped out and it was holding up the entire network.
Right.
And devoted every resource they had to it. All I can tell you is we're working with Amtrak to put in place a construction plan. I mean, we are mindful, there are cost components to this. So we have cost constraints. We're going to be sharing, I'm not a construction guy. I can't tell you if it's 2 weeks, 2 months, or 12 months.
Okay. And Jesse, I know that you said that you're, can't get too detailed about NEPA, but it does seem that the NEPA process is at least slowing things down, or at least you seem to suggest that it was slowing things down with a 30 and 60% review. So maybe just a little bit more detail. Is it the Section 106 component of overall environmental review, and it's that portion of the historic preservation law and not necessarily, traditional NEPA analysis that's slowing things down, including the consultation process under Section 106?
It's my understanding that both NEPA and Section 106 review are
Yeah.
ongoing, and that Amtrak has made submissions to the FRA. The FRA has granted Amtrak permission to proceed with project design, but has said that no groundbreaking activity can take place until the NEPA review is complete.
Right, and that tends, tends to be typical. Typically, Section 106 involves the consultation process. Do you know what's going on in terms of the status of consultation, who's being consulted, and what the time frame is for that?
I do not have that information. I can obtain it and provide it if that would be helpful.
That would be, typically grantees submit the environmental documentation, and it's my understanding, and this could be wrong, but this is through public bodies, that Amtrak did not submit some of the categorical exclusion documentation until last month. And then the categorical exclusion comes with, oftentimes, even if you get a CADX, which is pretty much the fastest form of environmental review, you have a Section 106 obligation, which involves consultation. And perhaps Amtrak isn't engaged in consultation or in the process for consultation, contingent on the CADX as quickly as one might expect. So, in fact, I'm not even sure it was last month. It might have even been earlier this month that Amtrak didn't submit the environmental documentation. So, if the primary holdup for the construction side is environmental review, and Amtrak is waiting several months to do its duty under the environmental review processes, I do wonder whether or not it's consistent with your statement about the highest priority. So, in a future status report, if you could detail specifically how Amtrak's been fulfilling its environmental review obligations or what's necessary for environmental review, that would be very helpful, because I think it would shed light on the delays here.
I really don't have any questions. Just a statement in saying that I think judging by the tone this morning, everyone sort of understands that I know most of us didn't want to have this hearing, but at the same time, there's still a lot of questions that remain. I join my fellow members, especially Karen before, saying that, very strongly supportive of passenger rail, but very disappointed sort of the timeline. So it sort of reminds me of a old Supreme Court decision where they said announced a decision with all deliberate speed. And, we all know what that meant. And I just don't want to see that happen here. I mean, we all want to see on this board, would like to see service up and running. Again, I respect the right of negotiations and what you're doing now. I think, again, I'm hopeful that what is happening behind the scenes and behind closed doors actually is progress and bring us closer. But I also have to say that again, I join in saying, is this too long? And what is the stumbling block? And if there is a stumbling block, I think it should be, we should know about it. And maybe we can try to help resolving it. If there is something out there, something tells me there is. It may be confidential. It may not be something that's shared today, but there is something out there. And again, I've heard from people here this morning, we're going to start 2024. And I've underlined that because, we've got, we're just into this year, but if we go down towards the end of this year and we're not there and trains aren't running, I would hate to call all of you back and other representatives back to ask that question, why not? And I think we deserve to do that. Even if you say you're still in negotiation, we deserve to do that. I think we need to get to the bottom of it. I think we're past due for getting it done. I applaud everybody here for negotiating, for coming to an agreement, but now it's time to, stop shaking hands and start moving trains.
Michelle? Let me see if we can bring this to a close. A couple of questions. How long? Well, you say in your status report, you expect the Chrissy grant agreements to be done soon, but there's no estimation of time. Given the fact that we're not reinventing the wheel here and resolving Chrissy grant agreements with FRA, as Karen pointed out, what is a realistic time frame when you're going to have these agreements done? And I guess it's the SRC that's going to be the receptacle of the grants, correct?
No, Amtrak is the recipient of the Chrissy grant.
Right.
And Amtrak and the FRA are working very closely together on as I mentioned, Amtrak just received the terms and conditions from the FRA in December 2023. We're working through those quickly. The date that we chose for our future status report is with the hope that we can tell the board by then that we have executed the funding agreement and are ready to dismiss the proceedings. So
you're telling me it takes from December to May to finish a Chrissy agreement?
Mr. Chair, as I understand it, this is not at all uncommon. This is a $178 million Chrissy grant that involves multiple projects and multiple stakeholders, and Amtrak and the FRA are working through it as quickly as possible. As you are well aware, the FRA is also administering lots of other grant agreements as well. And so the FRA is giving this an extremely high priority. The administrator has convened the principals of all of these parties to to reiterate that this is a high priority. So we hope to be able to complete it
Marty-
very soon.
That was 60 days ago. Patrick?
Well, I just think there's a little bit of a 1-2 step going on with FRA. FRA is given it a high priority, but they just convened a meeting in December. It's sort of this implication that FRA is the holdup. And Jesse, if you don't have information on when you gave FRA your environmental documentation, I'd ask that you refrain from that because, you just suggest that FRA's got a lot of grants. And so either say you think FRA is the delay or come prepared with what you submitted to FRA and when, but the whole implication that FRA is a high priority, but then not till this, I just think it's sort of insulting to the agency that's giving you an awful lot of money.
Member Fuchs, by no means do I mean to imply that FRA is the holdup. And with respect to the environmental documentation that you're referring to, that is not part of the Chrissy grant process. That is with respect to the Mobile Station Track project that is being funded outside of the Chrissy grant process. Amtrak and the FRA are working very diligently and cooperatively together to get this funding agreement signed. The funding agreement also requires consent from all of these parties before it can be fully executed. And we are working diligently, cooperatively, and giving it an extremely high priority. Obviously, Amtrak wants these funds so that it can get this service started. That's the whole reason Amtrak brought this proceeding.
I've looked at the projects that were apparently encompassed in the settlement agreement because they're part of the Chrissy grant application and the items that were approved. It seems to me we at least know that aspect of the settlement agreement. Is that right, Ray? You're nodding your head. So we know which projects were agreed on. Rob, which you indicated the same. Remembering, without getting into it, the elaborate discussion of this line, both the CSX and NS parts and the yards and the needs and the shortcomings of the line. As I read the projects that got funded, everybody's going to benefit, not just Amtrak being able to run the trains. There's going to be a lot more needed infrastructure, longer sidings in particular, and both railroads are running long trains that need to have sidings to move into. The port, as far as I can tell, fluidity is going to be improved by these, or at least protected by these products, which I assume is why you agreed. So everybody sitting at this table has a stake at moving this fast. You're all going to benefit to a large extent at the taxpayers' largesse, which is good. Let's do it. Rob, you have a singular role here because your client seems to be the one that's trying to move the city and Amtrak together. That's what the report says. The status report says that you're trying to facilitate the resolving all of these discussions. So I heartily encourage the port to keep at it and move this ahead. I personally, and I would like to suggest to the board that we not wait till May 1st to find out what's going on here. We don't know how long the NEPA review is going to take. We don't know where the progress is at this point of the Chrissy grant agreements. I'm going to suggest that we get a status report in 30 days and answer the questions you couldn't answer today about the details of the timing of what needs to be done. And even though they're not a party to this case, you're not going to, I haven't gotten a clear answer, but I think the answer is you're not going to run the trains until you and the city of Mobile have resolved your agreements, both for the station and the operating costs. And since this case is about running trains, we would like to know where it stands. So I'm going to recommend that you give us a report 30 days from now as to the current status, answering the specific concerns that have been raised here by the board this morning, and with a more precise estimate of when the trains are going to run and a construction estimate, Ray, as to once you get the go-ahead. We understand you can't put a spade in the ground until you get the go-ahead, but from that point forward, what will be, what the time frame is expected to be. So if, unless I hear any objections from the board members, the order will be that you give us a detailed status report on the issues that have come up here today in 30 days. And we'll issue a written order saying that. Staff. Yeah, but the 30 days starts today, so don't wait for our order. So make some progress. You know, there's a lot of people in this room who have done a lot of fast legal work when it needs to be done. It can be done. Get it done. If there's nothing else, we will adjourn. Thank you all for coming. Appreciate it.